Hi, it's Dr. Betsy, and we're back with another episode of Body, Mind, Spirit. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Evan H. Hirsch, who is amazing. And I can't wait to talk about something I think that majority of us suffer from, and it's fatigue. So if anybody can fix your fatigue, this is the man that can do it. And I can't wait to talk to him more. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Dr. Betsy.
Now, I wanted to ask you, how did you, because we're not trained in fatigue. It's not something that in medical school they're like, let's take a class in fatigue. It's not something that's really brought up. So how did you end up in this area?
So for me, it really started when I entered residency. I fell in love with my wife. She wasn't my wife then, but she is now. But I fell in love with her, and 3 months later, she couldn't get out of bed. And so that really started me on my path where I was in the hospital all the time, 80 hours a week, talking to all these attendings, doing all this research, learning all this about medicine, and there really wasn't much about fatigue. It's kind of like thyroid, heart issues, lung issues, certain other, Epstein-Barr virus maybe, but most of the docs that I spoke to, they really didn't have much to offer. So that kind of started me on my path. And then my wife got better after 3 years. And then a couple of years later, I got chronic fatigue, and it lasted for 5 years and just about destroyed my life, destroyed my practice, which I had at that point, destroyed my relationships. I had a new child, and I couldn't really help out at home. And my wife is getting over her fatigue. I mean, it really wasn't good for our relationship at all. And I had to keep hiring people to do the work that I was doing in the office. So, and then I hit a breaking point where I said, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to go ahead and fix this problem myself, because I was seeing a bunch of practitioners, even functional medicine practitioners, and I wasn't getting where I wanted to go. And so I went through a process and found all the causes that I had. And that's really what brought me to the great energy that I have today.
And that's one of the things I love about functional and integrative medicine is that it really gets to the cause because unfortunately, I mean, you and I were both trained in the traditional medicine way, but a lot of traditional medicine is just treating the symptoms, but not trying to find, well, why are you having those symptoms?
Right. Exactly. And, I found that there were 33 different causes of fatigue, and that everybody who has fatigue has 20 plus causes. So, and it really is all about the causes. A lot of people are looking for the right treatment, high dose IV vitamin C, this supplement, that supplement, whatever it is. And they're missing out on this fundamental truth, which is you have to figure out what causes you have, because then you can actually figure out what treatments to take.
And that seems very daunting. The fact that, as I was going to say, like fatigue is such like a general symptom. Like,
Mhm.
how do you go about even trying to begin to figure out what's causing that fatigue?
Yeah, and for people who just heard those numbers, like, and they're feeling overwhelmed, like, don't feel overwhelmed. It's like a systematic process that we go through that you can you can find resolution. So to answer your question, when we were in medical school and residency, what did we learn? We learned that 90% of the diagnosis was based on history and symptoms, and 10% was labs and physical exam, right? Well, the same is true here, where actually 75% of all of these causes can be determined by symptoms alone. And then the other 25% really need the labs. And so what we do when people come into our programs is in step one, we start assessing what causes somebody has. So usually within the first hour or two, they've gone through step one just based off of their symptoms. And then they can determine, they know 75% of their causes, and we can start fixing those.
I wanted to ask, I guess, even back up. What would you say is the difference between fatigue versus like, I'm just tired and didn't get enough sleep, or like what kind of makes that differentiation?
Yeah, and there really is a gamut, and I think that fatigue is really subjective in the sense that depending on the individual and depending on how much fatigue or being tired is compromising their quality of life, indicates how significant it is. right? So if you're trying to raise a family and work a job and you're surviving on caffeine throughout the day, and if you don't have your caffeine, you're crashing, maybe you're not sleeping well at night, maybe you've got brain fog, other weird symptoms, then that is fatigue. There are definitely definitions about what chronic fatigue syndrome is, which is all the way over here, and then just, tiredness that's not relieved by rest. But it can really be anywhere in there. And people just have to realize that it's not just about getting old, right? There's a problem and it needs to be remedied. And you shouldn't have to live with it. You shouldn't have to decrease your quality of life because of the way that you feel.
I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of people just brush it off and be like, this is what aging is like, and this is what it's like to get old. And they don't realize that, no, this may be your body kind of like screaming out, like, hello, I'm trying to get your attention, and there are things that can be done.
Yeah, I have a 68-year-old who's gone through our program who says he feels better now than he did when he was 30.
Wow.
So, and most of the time when people have fatigue and it's compromising their quality of life, this has been like a steady trickle, and so they know that they didn't feel great in their 30s, right? And so you fix the problem that didn't get fixed in the 30s, you actually feel like you did when you were younger.
That's amazing. And you have it broken down into like a 4-step process too.
I do. So the first step, like we talked about, is to assess the causes. So this is determining which 20 of those 33 causes an individual has, and 75% of those can be determined by symptoms, as we said, and 25% can be determined by labs. Then step 2, and I should back up for a second and talk about, so of those causes that we're looking at, they're really in 2 categories. So we're looking at deficiencies, so things that are not in the body that are supposed to be in the body, and toxicities. So these are things that are in the body that aren't supposed to be. So step 1, we figure out the causes. Step 2, we replace the deficiencies. Okay, and so these are deficiencies in things like adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones, vitamins, minerals, lifestyle habits. So not enough good food, not enough water, not enough sleep, not enough movement, neurotransmitters. And then in step 3, we're opening up the detoxification pathways. So if we think about the body getting rid of toxins or getting rid of crap as a series of tubes, then these tubes are essentially clogged. The liver, the kidney, the lymph, the neural lymph, which is in the brain, all of these different systems are essentially clogged when you have fatigue and when you have other illnesses as well. And what we want to do is we want to open these up. Because when we go into step 4 and we start removing these toxicities, we grab them, we pull them into the bloodstream, we try to get them out of the body. Guess what? If these tubes are clogged, it's just going to go back into a different compartment, right? So we have to make sure that we're opening these up, and everything that we use is natural. So these are herbs that are opening up these pathways so that when we go into step 4 and we're looking at heavy metals and chemicals and molds and infections and allergies and negative emotional patterns and electromagnetic fields, all of these toxicities, we're actually able to get them out of the body because we've done the groundwork of step 2 and step 3.
What do you think? I mean, the body overall wants to heal itself. So why is this happening? Why are these things happening to us? Is it modern life? What are we doing that is causing this? And I know that's not an easy question, but
it's a great question, and it has to do with the amount of stressors that we're exposed to now, more so than ever. There are more mental, emotional, and physical stressors. So when we're thinking about mental, emotional, like if you look at the news, you're going to be stressed out, right? You no longer have one person working and one person at home. Families just can't afford to do that anymore. So now you have 2 people who are trying to work and trying to take care of the family. So you've got more relationship stress. right? There's more financial stress because things are much more expensive, right? And then we have the physical stressors like heavy metals and chemicals and molds and infections, all these things that I was mentioning because of the exposures that we have, and where these exposures are not being regulated appropriately. You're probably aware that before we get out of the house in the morning, if we are in fact commuting before the pandemic, we were exposed to about 500 different chemicals. Everything from your soaps to your shampoos to your hand washes to clothes to whatever it is, right? So there's just an incredible amount of toxins that we're being exposed to that end up damaging our hormones, end up damaging our mitochondrial function. I mean, step back with some of these causes is that these deficiencies that we talk about really are caused by the toxicities. Toxicities are damaging these deficiencies. So it's just important to put that all into perspective, but that's what I see.
Yeah, that really sounds like very overwhelming, but obviously you got this down to a science. So
We try, we're collecting data, and we're seeing great results with the people going from 3 out of 10 to 9, 10 out of 10 energy on a regular basis utilizing our program. So
if people had to make like just simple steps that they could do in their lives now, while they're waiting to like check out your program, which we'll talk about some more later, but what kind of simple things can they do to make a big impact in their lives?
So it's really all about the lifestyle habits when you first start. And generally the people that we see have already tried modifying things in their lifestyle, and they've taken some supplements and they're just not having success because they have more causes, and they realize that after receiving some education from us. But in terms of those lifestyle habits, what we're looking at is people need to be drinking more water. You know, 2 to 3 liters a day. Most of the time, especially if they have fatigue, they need to be consuming about 3 liters of water a day. Put in a little pinch of sea salt, which will help out the adrenals for a number of reasons, but that can be really supportive for people. That's the first thing. Most people live in a chronic state of dehydration.
I saw some recent statistics that said that 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. And I was like, wow. And then I tell people all day long, drink more water. And then I find myself, you get so busy, and all of a sudden it's the end of the day, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't drink all the water I should. And then I'm trying to chug it all before I go to bed. And then you're up all night peeing. But
That's right. Yeah. And I think it's also, I definitely would agree with that number. And I think it's also interesting that 75% of Americans are obese.
mm,
And so there's something in there too. I mean, we do know that drinking enough water can definitely help open up those detox pathways, get rid of toxins that end up getting deposited in fat cells, and that's how you end up putting on weight. That's one of the ways, is that you end up getting more fat cells or bigger fat cells trying to dilute some of these toxins. So I definitely agree. Yeah. So number one is dehydration and consuming more fluids, more water. Another one is eating more good food. There's so many people, we talked about obesity, that are consuming too many grains. They're consuming too many sugars. And so that's really a major reason as well. And then people need to be moving more. Sitting is the new smoking. And so getting more movement is incredibly important. So those are things people can do right now.
yeah, and I want to talk to you about some more after we take a quick commercial break.
80% of women will develop a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. There is relief. There is hope. The Pelvic Floor Store, your resource for personal health.
Yeah, before we took the commercial break, definitely sitting is the new smoking. And I've heard that so much this past year. And I have a story that I really experienced that myself, and not even thinking about it. Just the last year with the pandemic, being home a lot, sitting in front of my computer for hours and hours a day, not realizing how deconditioned you can become just from doing that, to the point where I got, I put on a lot of that pandemic weight that everybody's been putting on. And I was like, I'm going to start exercising, and got winded walking 15 minutes down the road, to the point where I'm actually seeing my cardiologist right now to make sure that there's no other underlying problems. But it seems like it's just a pure deconditioning thing. So I was really shocked at how much sitting can really take a toll on the body. So
It's incredible. And we know that, exercise and movement really is a panacea. It's got the most amount of research on it. It solves so many different problems in so many different ways. So it's just so important. And, unfortunately, in the United States, we really don't have something built into our culture around movement. And I know for me, it's been really hard to kind of get back into it. And you have to be a lot more conscious since high school. High school, I'm doing recreational stuff, or even college, rec sports and going to lift with my friends and whatever. But then you get out into the real world and you have to really prioritize it. You have to put that time into your day in order to be able to do it. While other cultures, oftentimes after dinner, you're dancing. A lot of the Hispanic cultures, that's kind of what you do. You all fall out of your houses and you go dance. I remember doing that in South America, Central America, and it's such an important part of socialization and something we should really institute more here in the States.
Which is funny that you say, because we had another interview recently with a woman who talks about dancing to heal and movement therapy, yes, which also I connect with. I saw on your website that in your spare time, you like to do some hip hop.
I do.
Yeah, so that is great. So once again, everybody get moving. And that dancing seems like a fun way to do it, because you're having so much fun, you don't realize you're exercising. It's not that like, oh, I'm exercising. So
that's such a thing too. And I know it's really interesting. We recently purchased the Nintendo Switch, mainly for my daughter, because there's some great fitness games on there. So there's like adventure games, and I've been enjoying it too. There's adventure games where you're like running through this game, and in order to fight the monsters, you have to do squats and you have to do like chest pushes and you have to do this, that, and the other thing. And so, yeah, it has to be fun, and then we've got the Just Dance game or whatever, or you just turn on the music and you just dance to it, right? So it has to be fun. Sometimes we'll play basketball, but you're not going to do it unless it's fun, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's actually something I'm going to check out, because we have a Nintendo Switch. So, and I've always had some problems with, the exercise. Like I, put that in my head, like, oh, but really just doing some fun movements. And there's so many different things we can do. So get up off your butt, get out of that chair. Don't do what I've been doing the last year. So, oh my goodness. And what about, a lot of people think like, all right, well, I'm fatigued, so I just need to sleep more. So where does that fall into things?
So oftentimes the causes of sleep issues are also the causes of fatigue. So for some people, they're not sleeping enough, right? You need to be getting at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep. For other people, they're sleeping 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and they're still tired. Right. And so generally what happens is, as we fix the fatigue, the sleep gets fixed at the same time. Because oftentimes the sleep issue is a circadian rhythm dysfunction, where the body is confused about what is awake and what is asleep. Right. And so normally we want to be awake during the day and then asleep at night. What ends up happening when you have fatigue is that you kind of have this picture. You're wake and crash, like throughout the day. And then the same thing happens at night. And then consequently, you are up and down and you're just not getting really good quality sleep. And so, yes, if you feel like you're sleeping all the time, or if you're not sleeping enough, but you can't help it, you can't get enough sleep, those are going to also be fixed when you start to fix your fatigue problem.
I know you were saying there's so many different causes, but what has the role of COVID played in the last year or so with the patients you're seeing?
So one of the things that we really specialize in is infections. And so whether they're viruses, bacteria, spirochetes like Lyme and other type of co-infections, parasites, these are all the things that we do a lot of, because a lot of people, and I would say upwards of 50, 60%, who have chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis, have an infection which is lingering in the body that they haven't gotten rid of. And COVID-19, unfortunately, is just another one of those. Now we're seeing long COVID, or now called long haulers, or post-acute sequelae for SARS-CoV-2, or PASC, as coined by the National Institute of Health, where basically if you have symptoms of COVID that have persisted past a certain time, some people say 2 months, some people say 3 months, that you have this condition which needs to be remedied. And this condition really is an active infection of COVID that still is lingering. And what's interesting is that oftentimes we see that people who have the most mild symptoms initially oftentimes are getting this long haulers picture. And what we're seeing is that the immune system is distracted. And we see this also with our other infections, where when somebody has heavy metals or chemicals or molds or other infections that are present, the immune system gets hijacked off into left field, and then the infections can become opportunistic, take hold, and have a party. And so that's really what we're seeing with COVID. And we're also seeing that it's acting as a biofilm disruptor. So there's other infections that are also rising to the surface. And biofilm is kind of like this collagenous material. It's like jelly-like that exists throughout the body on the mucous membranes that is a place where bugs hide. And so it seems like COVID is coming in, breaking up these hiding places. The bugs come out, they become opportunistic, and then all of a sudden people are sweating spontaneously. They have shortness of breath. They have really awful mental health issues. I just saw a study of 236,000 people, and they were showing that within 6 months of diagnosis of COVID, 30% of those people had mental health diagnoses. Anxiety, depression. I mean, these numbers are huge. We're looking at, an epidemic of mental health issues just coming from COVID. But a lot of this is coming from these infections. And whether it's COVID or whether it's COVID breaking up the biofilm and allowing some of these other infections to come out that cause these symptoms, like we know, like Babesia, which is the North American malaria that causes the spontaneous sweating and shortness of breath and cognitive issues, or whether it's something like Bartonella, where people have pain on the bottom of the feet, muscle cramps, thyroid issues, problems falling asleep or staying asleep. Like, these infections are a problem and they need to be brought under control.
That's one thing that's so frustrating with these tick-borne illnesses, or even like things from mosquitoes and stuff, is that you want to get out there and get more active, but then you're battling, all these other illnesses. Actually, when I was doing infectious disease rotation, when I was in medical school, I saw a really funny study that said that they compared golf scores to risk of tick-borne illnesses. And like the worse your golf score was, the more likely you're going to have a tick-borne illness, because you're probably out in the woods chasing after your ball. So I think that with that say, they just leave the balls. But yeah, right. It's so difficult because, in all different areas of the country, we have ticks carrying things, mosquitoes carrying things. So...
And the challenge is that you don't even need to have contact with a tick anymore. And if you do have contact with a tick, most people don't even know it or remember it. Only 10% of people actually get the bullseye rash. So people need to, and even the Centers for Disease Control have stated that it really is a clinical diagnosis. So it's really based off of the symptoms that you have, kind of like what I was just mentioning. So people need to pay less attention to their labs, pay more attention to their symptoms, and go down the path if they feel like they have those symptoms, and not quit until they actually get the answers that they need. Because way too many people stop when a doc orders a Western blot or an ELISA test, and it comes back as negative. They're like, nope, it's not Lyme. And it's such a narrow window. It's not looking at the other co-infections. It's barely even looking at Borrelia, and these people are suffering, and so we're not doing them a service. And so people who are out there who are listening to this, if you've got weird symptoms, don't stop looking for answers until you actually get resolution to your problem.
And I think that's so difficult because, in traditional medicine, they're just not trained. We're not trained in this stuff. This is stuff that you and I have said, hey, wait a minute, we're not getting the answers that we want in traditional medicine. We've had to go out and search for these answers and teach ourselves. But it's really difficult because, patients don't know, their practitioners don't know. And I'm not, putting down the practitioners. It's just, it's not something that's readily out there. So where would you tell patients to go if they're having these issues and I need to find answers, I'm not getting answers, from my practitioners that I'm seeing?
Well, definitely functional medicine practitioners, but like you've mentioned, even functional medicine practitioners may not have a lot of this knowledge. We had to go and get this knowledge separately. I've done, different trainings on toxicities and on infections, and so I kind of combined functional medicine with environmental medicine, and then also combined it with some mindset stuff and some mindfulness work and some trauma work as well. And so you yeah, I mean, yeah, you need to look for people who kind of specializes in some of these things. And I have a Bartonella quiz on my website that people can check out to see whether or not they have the symptoms of Bartonella. But looking for these specific infections, Babesia, Borrelia, maybe Ehrlichia, Epstein-Barr virus, oftentimes that can give people a lot of information. But finding practitioners like us can be helpful.
And I want to touch upon the aspect of trauma, because you mentioned that. And can you explain what you mean by trauma?
Absolutely. And so the definition has changed over the years for me and for the community at large, where we're looking at now adverse childhood events or adverse life events, as I like to call it, which is basically this idea that is anything less than nurturing. I think that's the latest definition that I had heard. And so if any place along your development from age 0 until where you are now, if you had some sort of traumatic event that changed the way that you saw the world and increased the stress and the way that you think about the world, then that can be considered some sort of traumatic event. And so for me, I had a loving parents growing up. I obviously have my own issues from my parents, but I was rejected by a peer group when I was about 10, 11, 12. And that informed my life in a certain way. And it changed the way that I held my relationships. It changed the way it increased the stress on me. And so consequently, that was a traumatic event. So it doesn't have to be necessarily some kind of abuse. It can really be anything that is less than nurturing.
And those things can also have drastic effect on your health. So
Absolutely.
Where can people find out more about you and your Fix Your Fatigue program?
So they can go to fixyourfatigue.com. That's FIXYOURFATIGUE.com. And we've got a number of things going on, but you can click on programs and you can take a look at the programs that we have to offer. We have a long haulers program in addition to our Fix Your Fatigue program.
I want to thank you once again, Dr. Evan H. Hirsch, for being with us today. And also make sure you follow him on social media and also take a look at his website. For more information, you can also take a look at my website at drbetsygreenleaf.com. Don't forget to check out WYTV7.org, our website, for other programs and what we're doing in the community. Don't forget to click on that donate button, because you're helping not only bring programs like this, but also help with other community programs that are occurring. And also, don't forget to tune in for next week for Body, Mind, Spirit, as we talk more about body, mind, and spirit connection with health. And once again, thank you, Evan, Dr. Evan, for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on.